Hello friends, here I Kunal Nagpal would like to extend very soothing greetings of this beautiful evening to all of you. Dear friends, today we are basically going to discuss great insights into the economic scenario of the Indian economy and how is the global environment impacting India's overall growth story. So firstly, we are basically going to start with the PM Modi's great emphasis on research and development. PM Narendra Modi's strong pitch at the 108th Indian Science Congress for Research and Development on Tuesday, that is on 3rd January 2023, underlined the criticality of science and innovation for growth. The stress on taking science from the laboratory to everyday lives is actually a call for innovation that basically provides the basis for India's drive to be self-reliant. The focus on critical and emerging areas such as energy, sustainability, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, data sciences, development of new vaccines, and surveillance for newer diseases will have maximum impact on growth, development, and economic opportunities. Shri Narendra Modi ji's appeal took off from his 2022 Independence Day address, where he had emphasized the need for the ideas to be incubated, developed, tested, and applied to the real life situations institutionally and not in an ad hoc manner. An institutional framework alone can help create the structure for mentorship, access to opportunities, and help convert research into the real world applications and opportunities. This in turn requires funding, institutional support, and patience. India's research and development spending must increase from its low levels of 0.7% of GDP in 2017-18. This is actually less than half of the global average of 1.8%. The government spending accounts for 55 to 60% of R&D spending. The spending by the private entities, businesses, and educational institutions must go up. India's R&D should focus on leveraging low-cost, accessible technology to meet the developmental needs of its population. It is actually the time to put one's money where one's mouth is when it comes to talking about unlocking our demographic dividend. Now, my dear friends, let's move ahead after this insightful discussion on the core intricacies of the Union Budget 2023, which is to come on 1st February 2023. So how PM Modi's reforms in 8 years armed India to be the next dragon in the global economy. Let's go through this interesting write-up. Actually, naysayers have often doubted India and its economic progress, be it demonetization or the goods and services tax that promised one nation, one tax. Some reforms did leave the door ajar for debate. However, in recent years, India has actually emerged to be an economic powerhouse, riding on the key reforms and battling through the vices of a historic pandemic. India had just peaked into the list of top 10 economies in 2014. In a space of 8 years, it has galloped to outshine its former ruler, the United Kingdom, to become the 5th largest economy in the world. But India's growth story is perhaps just starting. India is likely to surpass Germany in 2027 and most likely Japan by 2029 at the current rate of growth, according to a SBI research note. If true, the country will become the 3rd largest economy in the world in the next 7 years, That is by 2029, next only to the United States and the larger rival China. True, India's economy has grown at a tremendous pace ever since economic liberalization in 1991. However, a booster shot came during the Modi era. Here are 7 top economic reforms during Modi's rule that set the launchpad for the country to become the next dragon of the world. So the first aspect is GST. The goods and services tax is arguably the high point of Modi's reform scorecard. The 5-year-old GST, which came into effect from 1st July 2017, has actually brought 1.3 million taxpayers into a unified indirect taxation system. GST saw a roller coaster ride in the initial days. However, it later witnessed record collections on a month-to-month basis, indicating its efficiency in plugging the revenue leakages. Nonetheless, GST has several rough terrains to conquer, such as rationalization of the tax slabs and fine-tuning the several products that attract the higher tax rate of up to 28%. Also, the GST regime has yet to include some key products, such as fuel, under its ambit. Mr. Naresh Sheth, a senior partner for indirect tax at N.A. Shah Associates, says tax administration is actually the biggest challenge in administering GST. Now, what are the GST challenges? The circulars or clarifications issued by the state authorities are not accepted by the central government officers and vice versa. The simultaneous and multiple proceedings by the state as well as the center authorities is actually indeed stressful for the taxpayers. The conflicting rulings on the same issue by advanced ruling authority of different states adds fuel to the fire. Even after the 5.5 years from implementation of GST, the non-constitution of appellate tribunal has left the taxpayers in helpless situations. So all these hamper the ease of doing business and creates an atmosphere of chaos, confusion, and distrust among the taxpayers. A specific provision in the Act should be enacted before making the circulars issued by any government binding on its counterpart, Mr. Sheth said. A provision should also be made giving exclusive powers to the jurisdictional officers to initiate the proceedings against the assessee. The issue of conflicting rulings by advanced ruling authorities can be resolved by having a central body for advanced ruling consisting of judicial members. Now here, the million-dollar question is whether the central government can resolve the above issues through the budget, as both the state and center have sovereign rights to tax the citizens. The tax administration discipline and service to the taxpayers is actually more important than the tax collections, he added. Now, next comes banking reforms. India's banking sector was one of the biggest beneficiaries under the Modi regime. The tone for NPA-saddled banks was set in the first year of Modi 1.0 when the Economic Survey 2015-16 suggested 4 R's, that is, recognition, recapitalization, resolution, and reform, to address the problem of non-performing assets, that is NPAs. The government then went on to introduce the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, that is IBC, which helped the banks recover their debts. To further strengthen the banks and give them much needed capital, the union government has basically periodically infused capital into the state-run banks, since the financial year 2015. The government has infused about 3 lakh crore rupees into state-run banks. As a result of the reforms, the non-performing assets have basically now fallen to 6-year low of 7.6% as on March 31, 2022, while the capital to risk weighted asset ratio, that is CRAR, of the banks have improved to 14.6% as of March 2022. The mega merger of 10 state-owned banks into 4 as parts of its consolidation plan to basically create the bigger size, stronger banks in the public sector is another highlight of the banking reforms during the Modi rule. The sector, however, will be keenly watching the budget announcements regarding the PSB privatization and the much-touted Banking Laws Amendment Bill. Next comes the PLI scheme. The production-linked incentive, that is the PLI scheme, across 14 key manufacturing sectors was launched in 2020-21 to give Make in India initiative the required boost. The PLI scheme incentivizes the domestic production in strategic growth sectors where India has a comparative advantage. This basically includes strengthening the domestic manufacturing, forming resilient supply chains, making Indian industries more competitive, and boosting the export potential. The PLI scheme is expected to boost production and employment significantly, with the benefits extending to the MSME ecosystem. So, recognizing the importance of semiconductors in the world economy, the government of India has also launched a $10 billion incentive scheme to build a semiconductor display and design ecosystem in India. The government is expected to further expand its scheme in the budget 2023-24. Now, the next important aspect is the UPI. The Unified Payments Interface has revolutionized the way India does business. From paying the chaiwala to buying the groceries in the supermarket to even paying for the high-end goods and transferring money, UPI has become the favorite payment option. Its huge popularity can be gauged from the fact that in the third quarter of this year, UPI clocked over 19.65 billion transactions in volume and 32.5 lakh crore rupees in terms of value. UPI person to merchant, that is P2M, and person to person, that is P2P payments emerged as the most popular payment methods among the consumers, accounting for 42% of the total digital transaction volume in the third quarter of this year, according to the data. UPI has seen exponential growth over the years. UPI clocked over 19.65 billion transactions in volume and 32.5 lakh crore rupees in terms of value in the third quarter of this year alone. That is 88% increase in volume and over 71% increase in the value in the third quarter of 2022 as compared to the third quarter of 2021. We have witnessed a dramatic transformation in the way India pays. UPI has become an example for the world and has set the tone for how India is a technology leader. Spokesperson from Paytm said, "The success of UPI is actually based on being universally acceptable and zero priced." In the future, by bringing UPI and QR code together, we can take it to the last mile, thereby creating a tremendous secondary and tertiary impact on the economy. Over the next few years, UPI will basically lead the way as a great way to bring more people into the digital world, thus driving financial inclusion, the Paytm spokesperson added. Now, dear guys, next aspect is the Jam Trinity. First proposed in the Economic Survey of 2014-15, the Jan Dhan Aadhaar Mobile, that is the Jam Trinity, is another key reform of the Modi government. The then Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, announced the linking of the Jan Dhan scheme, Aadhaar, and mobile numbers of all beneficiaries in 2016. It helped the government stop the subsidy leakages and ensure the poor get the full benefits of the scheme intended for them. It brought many who were financially excluded into the banking fold. The scheme basically proved to be a game changer during COVID times, as the government could provide direct help to the people with the help of the scheme. Now, the next very important aspect, my dear friends, is bankruptcy code reforms. Another major policy initiative of the BJP-led government is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, or IBC, which makes it easier for the banks to basically recover their defaulted loans. Implemented in 2016, it offered a one-step mechanism for the distressed businesses to resolve insolvency in an efficient and time-bound manner. It allowed a speedy resolution of the disputes and time-bound recovery of loans. Now, the next aspect making India the basically most powerful, one of the most powerful economies in the Modi-led government is the Real Estate Regulation Authority, that is RERA, which was another major reform which was introduced in 2016. It brought transparency to the sector, which had become synonymous with fraud and unaccounted money. This particular authority, which was the major reform, made it mandatory for the builders to register their projects before the start of the project. It also seeks to address other issues like pricing, quality of construction, and other charges. The Indian real estate sector has been one of the most substantial contributors to India's GDP growth and is expected to contribute 13% to the country's GDP over the next 3 years. To regulate, bring accountability and transparency along with protecting the consumer interest. It was crucial for the government to monitor and maintain the regulative oversight for this high-growth industry, said Mr. Anshuman Magazine, Chairman and CEO, India, Southeast Asia, Middle East and Africa, CBRE. Hence, RERA came into existence, which transformed the entire industry. The RERA reform has not only introduced the consumer safeguard mechanisms, but also has enforced accountability on developers, he said. Apart from this, RERA has provided a quick dispute resolution mechanism, and the sector is now more consumer compliant. Moreover, the compliance and disclosure feature has enhanced the confidence level of all stakeholders, including the developers, investors, and buyers, by protecting their rights. RERA has basically reformed the real estate industry, aiding in growth momentum by creating a reliable ecosystem contributing to the growing Indian economy. We will definitely notice tremendous benefits in the long term, said Mr. Magazine. Next comes Gati Shakti. The Modi government launched the PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan in October 2021. The 100 lakh crore rupees mega plan is actually expected to ensure logistical efficiency in business operations through the creation of infrastructure that improves the connectivity. Dubbed as a game changer integral to India's goal to become a $20 trillion economy by 2040, the master plan is expected to generate large-scale employment opportunities, cut down logistics costs, improve supply chains, and make the local goods competitive globally. Other notable reforms of the Modi government include PSU bank mergers, disinvestment, corporate tax cut. Mr. Modi has basically contributed so much. Further led by Ujjwal scheme, demonetization, the national single window system, and the creation of the bad bank. Now, my dear friends, this insightful and in-depth analytical discussion pertaining to how PM Modi's reforms in last 8 years armed India to be the next dragon in the global economy is actually very, very worthwhile. And it will also form the core basis for the upcoming Union Budget 2023. Now, we are going to discuss the major insights brought forward by Mr. Nadella. India's digital public goods build-out is actually amazing as per him. India's digitization initiatives and its work with the digital public goods have been very extraordinary. Microsoft Chairman and Chief Executive Mr. Satya Nadella said on 3rd January 2023. Microsoft is focusing on the 6 key aspects of digital transformation, including security, collaborative business process, re-energizing the workforce, migrating to the cloud, unifying data, applying artificial intelligence models as the platforms, among others. One of the things that is probably amazing to see is that India is actually leading when it comes to the digital public goods and digital infrastructure. Mr. Nadella said during his keynote address at the Microsoft Future Ready Leadership Summit in Mumbai. One of the things that is probably unbelievable, amazing, great to see is India lead when it comes to the digital public goods. There is India and then there is the daylight when it comes to the enlightened way. What a great quote. What a beautiful statement by you, dear sir. Mr. Nadella is on a 4-day official visit to India across Mumbai, New Delhi, Bangalore, and Hyderabad, where he is expected to meet the key customers, startups, developers, not-for-profit organizations, and students. This is Hyderabad-born Nadella's first visit to India since February 2020 and comes just 2 weeks after Alphabet Inc.'s India-born Chief Executive Sundar Pichai's trip to the country. One of the most fantastic things even in this trip into India that I'm learning about is actually looking right. Not just what's happening in the top cities of the country, but what's happening across all in the cities and how digital is played. He said, adding that there was huge scope for the growth in the cloud adoption market here. The cloud solutions comprise over 40% of the US-based technology leader. Every factory, every warehouse, every hospital and retail facility is actually going to need the computers where data is getting generated. So, distributed computing will remain distributed. So, with Azure Arc, we are even making sure that the cloud infrastructure gets truly embedded in the physical infrastructure, he said. Cloud adoption is actually imperative for economic growth with lower energy consumption, he said. Mr. Anant Maheshwari, president of Microsoft India, said the country is the second biggest contributor to the developer ecosystem and ranks on top in the contribution to the artificial intelligence projects. India's human resource capital is a huge advantage for the technology ecosystem, And according to the data from the Microsoft-owned professional networking platform LinkedIn, Indian talent is actually upskilling twice as much as the global talent, Mr. Nadella added. So this is really very, very relevant if we are considering the scope of the overall dynamics of the overall favorable dynamics of the Indian economy towards its overall growth in terms of technological ecosystem. Now, going forward, let's discuss certain norms for sustainable packaging which are to be incorporated soon, which would come into picture soon. The Department of Consumer Affairs is soon going to come up with the standards on sustainable packaging where the companies will have to adhere to certain norms before they claim their packaging is sustainable, said a senior official from the government. We are actually working on a comprehensive set of standards defining the sustainable packaging, said the officer. Before the companies make such a claim, they will have to comply with the new rules. The standards will have specifications about what kind of material, including plastic, paper, board, pulp metal, and glass, can be used in packaging claimed as sustainable. The Bureau of Indian Standards, that is BIS, will set the standards and they are expected to be published soon. The proposed standards will help India in achieving its commitment towards the environment on global platforms and its net zero ambition, the official said. So this is really going to be a very, very noteworthy development in the overall drive towards the greener economy. Now, my dear friends, we are going to discuss the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, view over chiding the European Union on changing the New World Order. Says Europeans need a wake-up call. The External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, speaking on the New World Order, Ukraine-Russia war and the Chinese challenge on 3rd January, advised the European countries that they need a wake-up call to understand the shaking up of international order, ANI reported, citing Die Presse. The remark from Dr. Jaishankar came during an interview with an Austrian publication where he said Europeans basically needed a wake-up call to understand that the difficult aspects of life are not always taken care of by others, adding, no region will be stable if dominated by a single power. The external minister said Europe focused on trade, emphasized multilateralism, and used its economic influence to shape the world on its own terms. Adding, he said, Europe does not want to involve in tough security issues and tends to develop within its own space to keep the international problems as far away as possible. Speaking about the shift in the world power structure, Dr. Jaishankar gave the example of the United States and said that despite all the differences, former US Presidents Mr. Barack Obama and Mr. Donald Trump both agreed that the United States can no longer play the same role in the world stage as it once did and must withdraw. We are already living in the dangerous times. This transition to the new world order will take a long time because the change is big. The Americans were the quickest to realize that they had to reposition themselves and seek cooperation with countries like us, said the External Affairs Minister, ANI reported. He further said, The current global order is still Western and has to be replaced with a multi-aligned one in which the nations will choose their own policies, preferences, and interests. Giving an example of India, Dr. Jaishankar said that New Delhi rejected American and European pressure at the United Nations to condemn the Russian invasion turned Moscow into its largest oil supplier and dismissed the perceived hypocrisy of the West since the Russia-Ukraine war, which began on February 24. He also said that this war has actually provoked moral outrage in the West over Russian atrocities, adding that Western sanctions against Russia have basically driven up energy, food, and fertilizer costs, causing acute economic difficulties in poorer countries. Meanwhile, he also echoed Prime Minister Narendra Modi's words that today's era is not of war. He called for both countries to resolve their differences through dialogue and diplomacy. Now, dear friends, going forward, let's discuss that will the budget 2023 give some tax breaks under the new income tax regime in order to make it more attractive? And it is very well presented by Ms. Shalini Jain, tax partner, People Advisory Services, EY, India. The taxes are actually crucial, especially for a developing economy like India, where only a small percentage of the population files income tax returns and pays the direct taxes. Whilst the government over the years has been making efforts to widen the tax base, observance of tax culture in India still remains low in comparison to the developed countries where a larger percentage of the population contributes to the tax pool in the economy, which allows these governments to provide better social security and healthcare benefits for its population. The government, to increase the adoption of income tax paying culture, introduced a new concessional tax regime in the budget 2020. One of the primary objectives was to ease the administrative compliance for the solarized taxpayer, who is a major contributor to the direct tax pool. The new income tax regime not only provides the lower income tax rates to reduce the tax burden on the total income, but also eliminates the requirement to maintain the proof of investments or expenses incurred by the salaried taxpayer. Whilst this seems to be a real game changer to reduce the income tax liability, however, it comes with its own challenges. The solarized taxpayer opting for the new income tax regime cannot claim most of the common tax exemptions and tax deductions which are available under the old or existing tax regime. The examples of tax benefits not available are tax exemptions from the house rent allowance and leave travel allowance, standard deduction of 50,000 rupees on salary, the tax deduction for the contribution made to the Employees Provident Fund, Public Provident Fund, life insurance premium, health insurance premium, etc. The salaried taxpayer also cannot set off the interest paid on a home loan for the self-occupied house property under the new income tax regime. The drawback of not being able to claim the most common tax exemptions and tax deductions has basically made new income tax regime less attractive and has resulted in a lower number of salaried taxpayers opting for it than anticipated by the government. So, with the government making its intent clear that they want to remove all the tax exemptions and tax deductions in the long run, the new income tax regime may be preferred mechanism for the people from the government's perspectives in the times to come. However, to make it more attractive for the salaried taxpayers and to encourage its adoption, the government can consider allowing some benefits under the new income tax regime in the upcoming budget, as mentioned below. That is, the tax rates may be modified to make a 30% tax rate applicable only on the income exceeding 20 lakh rupees. The government may consider lowering the tax rates for the lower tax slabs also. The government has been basically promoting the affordable housing schemes in the previous budgets by allowing additional deductions under the old income tax regime. The upcoming budget may allow the salaried taxpayers to claim the benefits for at least one house property that is self-occupied, so that the interest paid on a home loan taken for such house property can be allowed as a deduction. Next, the government may consider retaining a standard deduction of 50,000 rupees from salary, as the salaried taxpayers do not get a deduction for any expenses incurred by them. Also, almost every salaried taxpayer is contributing to investing in EPF, PPF, paying life insurance and health insurance premiums, etc. While these contributions or investments are necessary means of providing the financial security in old age and for ensuring the availability of life or health coverage in emergencies, allowing a deduction for these investments may act as an added incentive for the salaried taxpayers to become part of such schemes. The government may consider allowing the deductions under the Section 80C of the Income Tax Act 1961 for limited avenues such as the contributions to EPF, PPF, and qualifying life insurance products. Similarly, a deduction may be allowed for the payments of health insurance premiums under the Section 80D and a contribution towards NPS under the Section 80CCD 1/1B of the Act. Since the intent is to reduce the tax burden for lower and middle income groups, the government may restrict the aforementioned deductions to 2.5 lakh rupees. So, the salaried taxpayers would be delighted if the upcoming budget makes changes to the new income tax regime to make it more attractive by allowing certain much needed deductions. These changes may encourage broader acceptance of the new income tax regime by the taxpayers. This is because the administrative hassle of maintaining the records and proofs will be limited to a few items, while the taxpayers can continue to enjoy the overall lower tax rates on their total income. Now, dear friends, this is a very useful and insightful article, as it very broadly explains certain tax breaks under the new income tax regime, which will be given under the budget 2023 in order to make it more attractive. Now, going forward, let's discuss if there is complete control of forces on terrorism. And it is very well quoted by MHA. PM Modi ji connected 30,000 people with the democracy process by taking democracy to the village panch, sarpanch, block development committee and Zilla Panchayat level, noted a year-end review released by the Union Home Ministry on Tuesday. Earlier, only 3 families, 87 MLAs and 6 MPs in J&K were seen as part of the Jamhuriyat, that is the democracy process, the review stated. The special status of the erstwhile state of J&K was withdrawn on August 5, 2019, and the state was basically bifurcated into two union territories. While the recent incidents of the targeted killings in Jammu have led to candlelight protests, elections for the panchayat are due this year. According to the MHA statement, due to the Article 370, the Gujarat, Bakarwal and Paharis could not get the benefit of reservation in education, elections and jobs. Now, after the removal of the Article 370, they will get all reservation. The statement quoting Home Minister Amit Shah noted that there are no incidents of stone pelting in Jammu and Kashmir. As many as 42,000 people, including the civilians and soldiers, succumbed to terrorism, and in Delhi, no one flinched an eyelid. Now, under the leadership of PM Modi ji, there is complete control of the security forces on terrorism. There has been a 54% reduction in the terrorist incidents, 84% fall in deaths of the security forces, and about 22% fall in the recruitment of terrorists. Under the rule of the three families for 70 years, only 15,000 crore rupees investments came into Jammu and Kashmir. PM Modi ji has brought investment of 56,000 crore rupees in just 3 years, Mr. Shah had said during his visit to Jammu and Kashmir in October this year. The security at the borders can be ensured when the border villages are populated. Along with the deployment of the soldiers on the borders, the permanent security can be provided only by the patriotic citizens living in villages, and all border guarding forces will have to strengthen it, Mr. Shah had said. Tourism will receive a boost, and the huge problem of migration from the border villages will be removed, and employment opportunities will also be generated when people come here. This is basically the beginning of the process of reaching out to the last village on the border, reads the statement. Now this very beautifully depicts India's current policies regarding the complete control of the forces on terrorism, especially in the J&K district. Now, dear friends, going forward in this particular aspect, let's see how the situation is for seeking peace, and are we ready to face any challenge, as quoted by Mr. Rajnath in Arunachal Pradesh. India does not believe in war, but is prepared to face any challenge that arises before it, the Defense Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, said on 3rd January 2023 during his first visit to Arunachal Pradesh since December 9 India-China face-off in the Tawang sector. In the state to inaugurate the projects of the Border Roads Organization, Mr. Singh pointed to a statement by the Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji to the Russian President Vladimir Putin that the present era was not one of war. Through this statement, the Prime Minister brought this resolve of the country to the attention of the world, he said. Throughout its history, India never began a war and never captured even an inch of another country's territory, the minister said, adding, but if anyone mistakes our peace-loving nature as our weakness, I would like to assert that we worship not only peace but also strength. This is a very powerful statement by our respected minister. He further added, the conflicts of some or the other kind are being seen frequently around the world. India has always been against war, and this has always been its policy. On Tuesday, that is on 3rd January, Mr. Singh inaugurated 28 infrastructure projects built at a cost of 724 crores in Arunachal Pradesh. These comprised 22 bridges, 3 roads, and 3 other projects built under the challenging weather conditions at inhospitable terrains. According to the Defense Ministry, the highlight of the event was the inauguration of a 100-meter-long bridge over the Siam River. This bridge will actually facilitate speedy induction of troops, heavy equipment, and merchandised vehicles to forward areas of the Upper Siang district and the Tuting and Yingkiong regions, and will also boost socio-economic development of the regions. Now, this has been very fantastically presented by our respected Defense Minister with an in-depth analysis and with great insights. Very beautifully presenting that how India is well prepared for any type of adversity regarding war, though it always advocates peace and brotherhood, but it will not tolerate any kind of nonsense. Now let's examine the cropping pattern in the Indian economy. In 2 decades, the production of the primary crops increased by 52% globally, from 6.14 billion tons in 2000 to 9.3 billion tons in 2020, according to the FAO data. Their values increased at roughly the same price, that is 53% in the real terms, that is the pace is the same. From $1.8 trillion in 2000 to $2.7 trillion in 2020. 4 crops account for about half of the global primary crop production, that is sugarcane, maize, wheat, and rice. So the key highlight of the cropping pattern in the Indian economy is that is, in the 2 decades, the production of the primary crops increased by 52% globally, from 6.14 billion tons in 2000 to 9.3 billion tons in 2020, according to the FAO data. Now let's see how Citi cuts India current account deficit forecast to below 3% of the GDP. The Citi Group actually lowered its projection for India's current account deficit to 2.9% of the gross domestic product for the current fiscal year, citing the growth in the country's service exports and a lower oil price forecast. The brokerage had in August last year said it expected India's current account deficit to be as high as 3.9% of the GDP for the fiscal year ending March 2023. The key surprise came from the phenomenal growth in the services exports in the first half of the current fiscal year, which goes beyond just software services. Samiran Chakrabarti, chief economist for India at Citi, said in a note. The net exports of services rose 35% to $34.5 billion in the second quarter of the current fiscal. Citi also revised its current account deficit for the fiscal 2023-24 to 2.2% of the GDP from 2.4% earlier. The current downward revision in our forecast is led by the Citi's lower oil price view, Mr. Chakrabarti said. The oil prices have fallen sharply over the last 2 months towards the mid $80 per barrel level and are likely to remain subdued over the next year. The fall in oil prices would likely offset the weaker export growth, keeping the average monthly goods trade balance at around $23.5 billion dollars in the next fiscal year, Citi estimates. Expected fall in oil prices could weigh down the current account deficit by 0.9% in the 2023-24 fiscal year, Mr. Chakrabarti said. On the exchange rate, Citi expects the USD per INR to remain around 83 in the near term and to move to 79 to 80 in the second half of 2023, driven by a more decisive turn in the dollar cycle. Now, dear friends, going forward, let's examine a very important aspect, that is India's GDP nearing to $20 trillion per capita income at $10,000 by 2047, says Bibek Debroy. India's gross domestic product will be close to 20 trillion US dollars by 2047, and the per capita income may reach 10,000 US dollars at the current value of USD. Mr. Bibek Debroy, Chairman, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, said on 4th January 2023, that is today, virtually addressing the inaugural session at the 57th Annual Conference of the Indian Econometric Society held at the University of Hyderabad. He said, though the COVID-19 pandemic may have passed, still there is a lot of uncertainty around the world on what is happening in China, about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, growth prospects in Europe and the USA. In 2047, India will have a per capita income of the value of today's dollars of 10,000 US dollars. The average size of the GDP will be approaching close to 20 trillion US dollars too. India, therefore, will be a transformed society. A press release from the Varsity quoting Debroy said, remarking that basic necessities have been provided to the people, and more so in the rural areas by the government. He said the economic indicators after the COVID have improved in India. Everyone is now looking to see the rate of growth in 2023-24 and the growth of economy by 2047. According to him, India may witness the volatilities in the forex markets and the capital markets and exchange rates due to some of the uncertainties around the world, such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict, growth prospects in Europe and the United States of America. Since India is not insulated, we will also face the volatility. Forex markets and capital markets and exchange rates will face volatility. The inflation rates will also be impacted to some uncertainty, he said. Mr. Debroy opined that India needs a simplified GST and direct tax, as these are the areas on which everybody should think that the research that helps in making policy decisions much informed. In order to increase India's growth rate from 7% to 8%, lot more research needs to be done at the level of the states, as different states are at different levels of development, and hence the sources of growth will also be different. But the fact of the matter is that to raise the growth trajectory, we need to make the land markets more efficient. Agriculture will also vastly improve when we make the land markets more efficient. Similarly, we need to make the labor markets and the capital markets also more efficient, he added. So dear friends, this in-depth analytical discussion full of great insights makes us clear that how India's GDP is nearing to $20 trillion per capita income at $10,000 by 2047, as very beautifully depicted by Mr. Bibek Debroy. Now, we will consider that the cabinet approves 19,744 crore rupees for the National Green Hydrogen Mission. The Union Cabinet on Wednesday, that is on 4th January 2023, that is today, approved the provisions of the National Green Hydrogen Mission, said Union Minister Arunachal Thakur while addressing the media. The government has sanctioned 19,744 crore rupees for implementation of the project. Mr. Thakur informed that 17,490 crore rupees out of the sanctioned amount will be allocated for the strategic interventions. Meanwhile, 1,466 crore rupees will be used to conduct the pilot projects. The R&D component is likely to receive an investment of 800 crore rupees. The mission will be used to develop the overall development infrastructure under the PM Gati Shakti scheme, said Mr. Thakur. Green Hydrogen Hub will be developed to bring the buyers and producers under one roof, he said. Under the mission, 50 lakh tons of green hydrogen will be produced per annum by 2030. The incentives will also be given for the 5 years period for the manufacturing electrolyzers in the country. In 2021, our respected Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji had announced the launch of the National Hydrogen Mission during his Independence Day speech. The mission aims to provide direct incentives for green hydrogen manufacturing and generating hydrogen from green power sources. It is centered towards developing India as a global hub for manufacturing of hydrogen. Now again, this is a very insightful analysis with an in-depth analytical insights which very beautifully presents that how the cabinet approves 19,744 crore rupees for the National Green Hydrogen Mission, another mega step towards the green energy drive. Now, my dear friends, going forward, let's discuss how PM Modi briefs the King Charles on India's G20 presidency priorities. The Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji spoke to the King Charles III of the United Kingdom on 3rd January 2023 and briefed him about the priorities of India's G20 presidency, including the propagation of the digital public goods, said the government in a statement. In what was his first conversation with the Charles after the later assumed office, Mr. Modi conveyed his best wishes to the king for a very successful reign. According to India, a number of subjects of mutual interest were discussed during the call, including climate action, conservation of biodiversity, innovative solutions for financing the energy transition. The Prime Minister expressed his appreciation for His Majesty's abiding interest and advocacy on these issues, said the government. Modi ji also explained the relevance of the mission life, that is the lifestyle for environment, through which India seeks to promote environmentally sustainable lifestyles. The leaders exchanged views on the Commonwealth of Nations and how to further strengthen its functioning. They also appreciated the role of the Indian community in the United Kingdom in acting as a living bridge between both countries and enriching the bilateral relations, said the Indian readout. So dear friends, this is actually an excellent content as it helps us to analyze the core insights of the briefing between PM Modi and King Charles on India's G20 presidency priorities. So dear friends, it's a great session wherein we have basically discussed the core insights of the Indian economy considering various aspects. I really hope that you have found the session extremely interesting, helping you to embrace your overall knowledge set with great insights and new sets of knowledge. So on this note, I would like to conclude my session, and I really hope you have gathered great insights helping you to cultivate your overall wisdom regarding your overall awareness about the Indian economy and what all new developments are taking place here and what are the future prospects. You might be able to assess this particular scenario. So dear guys, I really wish that you subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you actually get notified about my economic updates on regular basis, which we are discussing on this amazing platform. And it's really a pleasure to interact with you guys. It's really an enriching experience for me as well, as it helps to build the two-way relationship, and it helps to establish a very good bond between me and you amazing audience. Thank you so much. Namaskar. Jai Hind.